Hello everyone, and welcome back to today's video. So today I'm going to be teaching you all about skin tones, or how I personally color them. Last week I made my video on how I color them traditionally, which is, pencil and paper, and this week I'm teaching you how to do it digitally. I totally suggest checking out last week's video if you'd like to know how I color skin tones using my two most common mediums, which are alcohol markers and colored pencils. It's very good if you'd like to start your art journey and you don't really know how to color skin tones or how to adapt to people. And then in this video, I'm going to be teaching you how I do it digitally using Procreate on my iPad, and we're just going to get straight into it, so let's begin. So first things first, we need to talk about the color wheel. When I'm referring to any of the colors on the lighter part, I'm talking about the colors that are more saturated or at the top of the square. And when I'm talking about the darker colors, I'm referring to the bottom section, which tend to be where the gray and the darker colors are. So for this red square, the lighter colors would be white to the sort of pink area to the saturated red, and then the darker colors would be the browns, the grays, and the dark reds. And, pretty self-explanatory. So first, you have your model. I'm going to be representing how I do darker skin tones, and this is just a model. You can pretty much apply this to almost any skin tone, but it varies from place to place. First, you need to choose your undertone. Skin tones have a variety of different undertones, whether it be more yellowy, more red, more olive, it just depends. Usually, I start out with Procreate Square. If you're doing this in other programs, you may have to vary how you color a bit. When I'm doing darker skin tones, I tend to pick in the red to orange area, and then I tend to go a lot darker. And remember, this is not something you always nail on the first try. Sometimes it can take me multiple attempts before I find a skin tone that I like, and you'll see that when I move on to the lighter skin tone. Then I fill in my base color. You can choose to either have your skin tone as your base color or set a different color. And then moving right along, I choose my blush color or my shading color. This is going to be my first pass. I go a little darker and more saturated, so more towards the red area and then more towards black. And then I just shade in prominent areas like the nose, the cheeks, and the ears. These just help really convey a skin tone, make it look lively. I also tend to shade a bit on the forehead, around the chin, and under the chin, on the neck. That's usually my shadow. And I'm not really going over light sources here. This is just sort of a default lighting condition. But I tend to shade under the neck with the initial blush color, so that way it's easiest to sort of direct. I also do a bit of blending, and then I choose my next color. For the next blush, I just go a bit darker and a bit more red. I usually go in a downwards, upwards motion, so I go darker first, and then I go more saturated, which is more towards that bright red area. And I usually use a soft airbrush. If you'd like to be a bit more controlled, you can always use a smudge tool or use Gaussian blur if you have that available in your program. And then I'm shifting to quite the bright red to do underneath the eyes. I usually do that as a bit of a pop of color. And remember, you can always mix your colors once they're on your actual canvas/person. And then you just keep adding shading, keep going around, adding things to your liking. Depending on how blushy or how bright you want your characters to be, you just keep adding and adding. And then for shading skin tones, I usually go to the blue and purple area as my default shading. I pick a sort of desaturated purple color, purplish blue, and then I go ahead and add that to certain areas, and I color pick using the color dropper, and I go to the very edge of the pixels where they meet, and I just sort of decide a color that seems like it fits the skin tone more. I add that shading to everywhere it needs to be, and I'm pretty much done. And then I go to my highlights. Usually it depends on the piece and the light source if I add very strong highlights. Usually for darker skin tones, I like to go more yellowy orange, and then for lighter skin tones, I like to go more yellowy red, but I'll get to that later in the video. So I choose a yellow color, usually around in the middle, because you don't want anything to be super bright, but it also depends on your light source. And then I blend that out just a bit, so it's not super harsh, and I have myself the skin tone. So I just finished up coloring everything, and that's what it looks like. And moving on to this next sketch, which is going to be the lighter skin tones. Also, you'll notice that the white I use for the darker skin tone in her eyes is not actually a pure white. Usually using a more desaturated white color or off-white is a lot better for your pieces. Because I'm on a gray background, it's kind of hard to display this. But I'll show you at the end some of my other art pieces where you use a white that is akin to your piece. So if you have a more blue piece, use a more bluish red, not a bluish red, use a bluish white. It just makes it a lot easier and a lot nicer on the eyes, and it tends to fit the color palette more. So as I'm doing the line art for this part, we're just going to skip ahead and go to the coloring phase. Alright, so we're here to the coloring phase. So first, I like to tend to lean my skin tones more yellow to orange to red. I tend to stay in that warmer color area, preferably around the reddish orange, and then I tend to go up to the lighter white section and in the middle of the saturated colors. And when it comes to lighter skin tones, depending on the light source and the overall feel of the piece, can really depend on what you want. For darker skin tones as well, you can really play around with it a lot. I don't actually go with this first skin tone here. I ended up color mixing a bit. I think I ended up making a bit lighter and a bit more red, and just overall playing around with everything you need. You're not going to nail a skin tone the first try, and don't be afraid to color mix. Just go ahead, do your color palette, and do your initial colors. One thing that I would recommend to a lot of beginner artists is do the colors you think you want and then adjust them afterwards accordingly, because you don't always get it the first try. So if you will have a certain skin tone in mind, do what you think you want, put all the colors in, and then adjust them afterwards, so that way you don't have to completely recolor pieces. Here I am moving on to the blush. I purposefully made it a bit dark here, and then I sort of slide the slider around and just take my airbrush, it's a custom brush that I made myself, and sort of just pull it and push it around. I color pick, and I make sure that it just fits the skin tone. I also add it to my usual areas, which are the cheeks, the nose, the ears, and under the neck, and a bit on the chin as well. And I also shade under her hair. You can always use the blush color as shading. It tends to make a piece more harmonious, in my opinion. Then I shift over to the red side, and I tend to take a sort of deep color, and this is a lot darker than it actually needs to be. I'm going to end up color picking here to really match my colors to make it seem a bit nicer. Here I am doing that, and then I blend it out to make sure it looks cohesive in the piece. So I put those in my usual areas as well, just doing general blending. I pick from the lighter color to the darker color and just sort of smooth it out and make a nice transition. Then I'm going to go quite bright here with the red to really add life into those cheeks. Remember, human skin colors are not just all one flat color, so don't be afraid to sort of mix colors around and do something out of the ordinary. Just because it isn't copy-paste realism doesn't mean that you can't experiment. So here I am doing the blush. And then I move on to shading. Usually for lighter skin tones, I tend to go on the purpley pink side instead of the blue purple like I did for darker skin tones, and I tend to color pick a lot here as well. It's all just about experimenting and trying your best to find what you like. And yeah, I go a bit more red here because I thought it would fit the piece. And also remember, this is just a general skin tone tutorial of just a general light source. If you're doing anything other than sort of a straight on neutral lighting, all the shadows and the shading is gonna change. So for the lighting here, it's just very basic under the neck, under certain areas. Then here I am just putting in the other colors, and we're gonna skip through that just a bit. And as I'm wrapping up the final colors, you'll also notice that I didn't use a pure white for her eyes either. And here's the final result. When you're doing highlights, I just usually pick a lighter version of the skin tone. Highlights really vary on the light source, so I don't always remember them. But here I am showing you my other art pieces where the skin tone is influenced by the colors around it. So for this venti piece, his skin tone is a bit darker and desaturated because of the background being a lot darker and just the general colors and hues. You also notice that his eye color isn't super bright either. For this piece right here, drawing myself as a Splatoon character, the skin tone appears really red because of the background. For March 7th is a similar case to Venti. I went really saturated here for the dad's skin tone. I just really wanted to play around with it. And you also notice my extreme shadows being literally purple. That's what I mean. You can go kind of crazy with it. You can also see just the variety of skin tones. I wanted to show this as sort of the last minute wrap up, just noticing how your background and other colors can influence your skin tones and how it overall impacts it. You can see here that my skin tone is supposed to be a dark color, but it ends up being more purpley because of the lighting and the shading. Especially when you have intense lighting, it can drastically change the colors you use for skin, and skin is a living thing, so it does tend to vary a lot. So as we're wrapping up here and I'm showing you my last few art pieces, I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. If you'd like any other tutorials from me in the future, I'd be happy to show you some more. Just general art tips and me exploring my own art growth as well as helping you all as well. I hope you all enjoyed this video a lot, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!